In James' room, it's dark, and the only light comes from the bright, strange glow of his phone screen. He's with Louise again. They shouldn't be watching this. But curiosity proved too strong. Secret videos, confusing and puzzling. Yet they couldn't look away. Weeks later, their secret is exposed, and James' life will never be the same. But will they learn from their mistakes? Is it too late? In 2023, in the Central Clinic of Dallas, two friends, James and Louise, lived in a small but close-knit community. The families of James and Louise were neighbors, and their bond was as strong as the one between siblings. The two children had known each other since they were toddlers, and their parents, Aunt Jackie and Aunt Rachel, had been best friends for years. The two mothers often spent time together, cooking, chatting, and helping one another with various tasks. It was not uncommon for one family to look after the other's children, and both mothers were deeply involved in each other's lives, sharing their joys and struggles. James and Louise spent nearly every moment together. They played games in the yard, ran around the streets of their neighborhood, and often sat down for lessons together. Whether it was schoolwork or games, they were inseparable, always finding ways to amuse themselves. Their bond was something rare and special, something that the two mothers appreciated greatly. They were often amazed by how easily their children got along, how well they shared everything from toys to ideas. Despite their closeness, each child had their own individual personality. James was a quiet and thoughtful boy. He loved reading and solving problems, often finishing his homework in record time. Louise, on the other hand, was more outgoing and full of energy. She loved adventures, and while she did her schoolwork, she was always the first to run outside for some fun. Together, they made a perfect pair. Their personalities complemented each other, creating a balance that worked effortlessly. James had always been a good student, and his mother, Aunt Jackie, was proud of his academic achievements. She always encouraged him to keep up the hard work, ensuring that he had the resources he needed for his studies. However, as he got older, James began to ask for more and more things, especially as he saw his classmates with gadgets and technology that he didn't have. One day he asked his mother for a phone. It wasn't just a random request. He claimed it was for schoolwork, for research, for staying connected with his friends. Aunt Jackie hesitated at first. She wasn't sure if a phone was appropriate for James, especially considering his age. But after some thought and remembering how responsible he had been in the past, she decided to buy him a small, kid-friendly phone. She made sure to emphasize that the phone was for practical purposes, reminding him that it was meant to help him with his studies, not for idle entertainment. Aunt Jackie hoped the phone would serve as a tool, a way for James to stay connected with his peers and learn new things. She trusted him, knowing how diligent he had been with his studies. The moment James received the phone, he was filled with excitement and gratitude. His wide smile as he hugged his mother said it all. James promised to use the phone responsibly, and Aunt Jackie felt a wave of relief as she saw how happy it made him. Louise, of course, was just as excited for James. She wasn't the kind of child who stayed home often, but now, whenever James was at home with his phone, she would visit him to check out whatever new games or apps he had. They would sit together, laughing and sharing what they found on the phone. But as time passed, something began to change. The two children began to spend more time indoors, less interested in playing outside. They would sometimes go out for short bursts of energy, but the phone became an increasingly important part of their day. It wasn't just a way to play games anymore. They started exploring new parts of the device, finding more apps, more features, and eventually things that were not meant for children. But for the moment, their world still felt safe and innocent, or so it seemed. A few weeks passed after James had received his phone, and it became an everyday part of his life. What started as a tool for homework and communication gradually shifted into something else. The games and educational apps were fun at first, but they quickly lost their novelty. James began exploring the phone more, testing out its features and seeking new ways to pass the time. It was during one of these exploratory moments that he stumbled upon something strange, an app labeled with a bold 18+ warning. James was immediately intrigued. He had seen these labels before on websites or in games, but he had never actually encountered them on his phone. He wasn't sure what it meant, but his curiosity began to get the better of him. What could possibly be behind a door labeled with such a warning? What was so special about it that adults seemed to be the only ones allowed access? His mind raced with questions as he stared at the app icon. wondering if it was something exciting, something forbidden. He knew he wasn't supposed to open it, but the temptation was too great. He wasn't sure why, but the allure of the unknown felt like something he just had to experience. James waited until the evening, when both his mother and Aunt Rachel were busy in the kitchen and no one would notice. He slipped away to his room, pulling the phone out of his pocket. The screen lit up as he unlocked it, and for a moment he hesitated. He thought about the possible consequences, but his curiosity won out. He pressed the icon, and the app opened to reveal a series of videos. The thumbnails were provocative and mysterious, featuring people he didn't recognize, doing things he didn't understand. But something about it fascinated him. James couldn't resist. He tapped on one of the videos and it began to play. Meanwhile, Louise, who had been hanging around the house as usual, soon found her way to James's room. She knocked lightly on the door before pushing it open, eager to spend time with her friend. She wasn't the type to stay cooped up indoors for long, but James's phone had been a magnet for her too. When she saw him sitting in front of the screen, eyes wide with excitement, she asked him what he was doing. James, eager to share what he had discovered, quickly showed her the phone and the strange videos. At first, Louise was hesitant. She didn't know what to think of what was playing before her. The videos were unlike anything they had ever seen, strange, confusing, and yet there was something undeniably compelling about them. They both sat in silence for a few moments, the flickering images filling the room with an eerie glow. They didn't understand much of what they were watching, but the idea of watching something secret and hidden away from the adults made the experience feel thrilling. There was an almost magical quality to it, an excitement that came from doing something they were never supposed to do. The allure of the forbidden drew them in further. They couldn't stop watching. The video played on, and with each passing second, their curiosity deepened. They were no longer just exploring the phone for fun. They had crossed a line into something new and uncharted. The world they had known seemed to fade away as they focused entirely on the screen. Neither of them had any idea what they were getting into. They didn't realize that by watching these videos, they were opening a door that would change everything. For now, it felt like just another game, a secret that no one else knew about. But they couldn't have known that this small act of curiosity would have lasting consequences. They were too caught up in the excitement, too blinded by the thrill of the unknown. What started as an innocent exploration quickly turned into a dangerous habit, one that they would soon find impossible to escape. And so, without fully understanding the gravity of what they were doing, they continued watching, unaware of the consequences that were slowly creeping into their lives. As the days went by, James and Louise found themselves sinking deeper into the world of secret videos. What had started as an innocent curiosity gradually became a daily habit. The allure of the forbidden grew stronger, and the two children began to spend more time alone, watching the videos whenever they could. They no longer played outside or spent time with their other friends. The hours they had once spent in the yard or at the playground now seemed like a distant memory. Instead, they locked themselves away in James's room, staring at the phone screen, mesmerized by the strange, confusing content. The changes in their behavior were subtle at first, but soon enough it became impossible to ignore. They began to speak less, their once lively conversations now replaced with silence, as if they were hiding something. They no longer laughed or joked like they used to. Their playful energy had faded, and in its place was a distant, almost detached air. Louise, once full of curiosity and excitement, now appeared more withdrawn. James, too, became quiet and preoccupied, his mind constantly distracted by what he had seen on the phone. They stopped inviting their friends over to play, preferring to be alone with the device. Their parents began to notice the changes, but they couldn't pinpoint exactly what was wrong. It was a feeling, an unspoken tension that grew with each passing day. One afternoon, Aunt Jackie returned home earlier than usual. The house was unusually quiet, and something about the silence felt off. She hadn't expected it to be so still, and the lack of sound made her uneasy. She called out for James and Louise, but received no response. Her concern grew as she walked through the house, her steps echoing in the emptiness. It wasn't like the children to be so quiet. Suspicious, she knocked on James's door, her hand hovering over the doorknob. When there was no answer, she carefully opened the door, stepping inside. What she saw made her heart skip a beat. James and Louise were sitting. Aunt Jackie's eyes quickly moved to the phone, which was lying on the bed, partially hidden under a pillow. It was obvious that the children had been trying to hide it from her. Her heart sank as she picked up the phone and unlocked it. She scrolled through the history, her hands trembling. The videos that flashed across the screen were not what she had expected. They were disturbing, strange, and nothing like the educational content she had imagined James would use the phone for. Aunt Jackie felt her stomach churn as she saw the titles of the videos. The content too mature for children, too inappropriate for her son. She turned to James, her face pale with disbelief. "What is this?" she asked, her voice shaky. Louise, who had been sitting quietly beside James, immediately began to cry. Aunt Jackie's mind raced, struggling to comprehend what she was seeing. Her first instinct was to protect her child, but it was already too late. She had no idea how long James and Louise had been watching this content, or what it had done to them. The silence in the room grew heavier, and the tension between the three of them was palpable. Aunt Jackie's thoughts moved quickly, and she knew she couldn't handle this alone. She immediately called Aunt Rachel, knowing she had to tell her what had happened. It wasn't just a matter of disobedience or a simple mistake. The children had crossed a line, and now the consequences were beginning to unfold. They couldn't just go back to pretending everything was fine. This was no longer a situation that could be fixed with a simple conversation. Something deeper was at play, and Aunt Jackie feared it might already be too late to undo the damage. Aunt Jackie and Aunt Rachel were in a state of shock. The discovery of the videos and their consequences had shaken them both to their core. The reality of what James and Louise had been exposed to settled heavily on them. They immediately took action, trying to make sense of the situation and figure out how to guide the children back to a place of safety and understanding. Aunt Jackie took the phone from James, her hands shaking as she turned it off. She was determined to take control, but the worry in her heart was undeniable. What could they have been thinking? How had this happened under their watch? In the days that followed, both mothers became more involved, checking in with the children more often. They tried to have conversations, asking about their feelings and any changes they had noticed in their behavior. But despite their best efforts, James and Louise only seemed to pull further away. They began avoiding their mothers, sneaking around, and still finding ways to access videos in secret. The phone was gone, but their curiosity remained. The restrictions only fueled their desire to keep exploring. What was once a simple app had now become a dangerous obsession, and the more they tried to prevent it, the deeper the children sank into the world they had discovered. The children's behavior continued to shift, and it became clear that the videos were more than just a passing phase. They had begun to imitate the things they had seen, not fully understanding what they were doing or the impact it would have. They were no longer the playful children they once were. Instead, they seemed lost, withdrawn, and distant. What had once been a playful bond between James and Louise now seemed to hold a darker, more secretive energy. Then one day when the two mothers went out shopping, the children were left alone again. Without the usual supervision, James and Louise seized the opportunity to act out what they had seen in the videos. They locked themselves in the bathroom, thinking no one would catch them. The space felt private, safe, and removed from the prying eyes of the adults. They had begun to replicate the scenes, trying to act them out as if it were some kind of secret game. The thrill of doing something forbidden seemed to fuel their actions, and they had no idea of the danger they were putting themselves in. But their secret would not remain hidden for long. As they began to reenact the scenes, there was a sudden knock on the bathroom door. Aunt Jackie's voice echoed through the silence, filled with worry. "James, Louise, where are you?" The children froze, panic setting in. They had not expected to be caught. As Aunt Jackie pushed open the door, her heart dropped. The sight before her was beyond what she could have imagined. The bathroom, once a safe space, now felt like a place of betrayal and confusion. She could see it in their eyes, the guilt, the fear, and the bewilderment. She stepped forward, her hands trembling, as she picked up the phone that lay on the counter. The screen still displayed the app they had been using, and the history was there, as clear as ever. Aunt Jackie's mind raced as she scrolled through the footage, her face turning pale with realization. This was not a simple mistake. They had gone too far, and there was no going back. The shock of seeing them in the midst of this twisted reenactment hit her like a wave. She was overwhelmed by the depth of their actions, by the consequences they had yet to fully understand. In that moment, Aunt Jackie knew that this was no longer something that could be easily fixed with discipline or a stern conversation. The damage had been done. The aftermath of the discovery was nothing short of devastating. Aunt Jackie, overwhelmed by the shock of what she had just witnessed, collapsed in the hallway. Her heart raced as her mind struggled to comprehend what had happened. The weight of the situation, the fear for her son and his friend was too much to bear. The reality of how far things had spiraled out of control hit her like a wave. In the midst of her panic, she called for help, and soon an ambulance arrived, taking her to the hospital to recover from the shock. The event had shaken the entire family to its core, and the sense of dread hung heavy in the air. In the days that followed, both families came together to face the consequences of the children's actions. Aunt Jackie and Aunt Rachel were deeply concerned about the emotional and psychological impact on James and Louise. They knew that simply taking away the phone was not enough. The children had seen things they were too young to understand, and they had made choices that could have lasting effects on their lives. It was clear that the two children needed more than just discipline. They needed guidance, support, and education on how to make better decisions moving forward. The families decided to seek professional help. They contacted a psychologist who specialized in child behavior and digital safety. Dr. Michelson, a well-known expert in his field, began working with James and Louise. He started by explaining to them the importance of making safe choices in the digital world, teaching them about the risks and dangers of online content. The sessions were not easy. Both children were reluctant at first, ashamed of their actions, and unsure of how to express their feelings. But over time, they began to open up, understanding more about the emotional and psychological impact of what they had experienced. James and Louise were also enrolled in after-school programs, where they could learn about making responsible choices and how to navigate the complexities of the digital world. They were taught lessons on the importance of empathy, respect, and the consequences of their actions. Slowly, they began to realize the seriousness of their mistake. They started to understand that their curiosity had led them down a dangerous path, and they became more aware of the dangers lurking in the online world. As the children began to heal emotionally, their parents also took steps to ensure they could guide them through this difficult time. Aunt Jackie and Aunt Rachel became more involved in their children's lives. Spending quality time with them and offering more open conversations, they took extra care to monitor what their children were doing online, ensuring that they had access to safe, educational content. The families made it a priority to be present, to listen, and to offer support when needed. Over time, the children learned to make better choices. They began to engage more with their peers, spend more time outside, and reconnect with the joys of childhood that they had almost lost. They still carried the weight of what had happened, but they were now armed with knowledge and understanding. Their parents, too, had learned valuable lessons. They realized how important it was to stay connected with their children, to understand their world, and to offer guidance without judgment. It was a hard lesson for everyone, but in the end, it strengthened the bonds within the families and helped them move forward, more aware of the complexities of the world their children were growing up in. The story of James and Louise served as a stark reminder of the power and danger that technology can hold, especially when left unchecked. In a world where digital devices are an integral part of everyday life, it became clear that simply trusting children with access to technology was not enough. They needed guidance, boundaries, and most importantly, open communication. While technology could offer opportunities for learning and growth, it also had its darker sides, hidden dangers that could have lasting effects on a child's development. The events that unfolded in the story showed how curiosity, when not properly guided, could lead children down dangerous paths. James and Louise were not bad children. They were simply exploring the world around them, as children often do. But without the right boundaries and conversations about the potential risks, they unknowingly exposed themselves to content that was beyond their understanding. The consequences of their actions, though not immediately apparent, were deep and profound. The story highlighted the crucial role of parents and guardians in maintaining a balance between trust and vigilance. It wasn't enough to just give children access to technology. They needed to be educated on how to use it responsibly. Active involvement from parents, regular check-ins, and discussions about the digital world were essential in shaping how children approached and interacted with technology. By fostering these conversations early, parents could help ensure that their children navigated the digital landscape safely, avoiding the pitfalls that could otherwise lead to harm. In the end, the story of James and Louise emphasized that parenting in the digital age requires more than just supervision. It requires active engagement, understanding, and a commitment to providing children with the tools they need to make informed decisions in an increasingly complex world.